Good afternoon. So all of the post-food sleeping is now done, right? That's usually what happens this time of afternoon. I was joking with Chris that this is the 1993 reunion tour. So
that's right.
The last time we worked together was 1993, and it's a nice little segue into what the conversation is about. Speaking of science fiction, who would have believed there'd be a video game business long enough for us to be around that long? One of the things that I think was kind of interesting was when we first started working together, the world was full of limitations. The majority of games, literally 2 years before, I had shipped an Apple II game on a 140K floppy drive and squeezed every bit onto it. And then when we started to work on the products that eventually ended up being things like Wing Commander 3 and 4, we were on how many discs?
Well, Wing Commander 2 was, I can't remember how many 3.5 floppies, but we went to 4 CDs on Wing Commander.
Yeah, I think it was 11 or 12 for 3.
So, yeah, and Wing Commander 1, I think, was about 4.
Right, so just to be clear, that was 4 CDs in a time when everybody else was hard-pressed to ship stuff that filled 1. So we were pressing limitations at that point.
Full motion video does for you.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you talk more about what those limitations were like, and then how Star Citizen has kind of broken those ones and created new ones.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, I would say that, you know, if you look at the games I've done in the past, and what I'm trying to do with Star Citizen now is, it's always been about creating as visceral as an experience and creating a world that you can go and inhabit and take a journey inside. And in 20 years ago, you were much more limited by how you could display it, how you could render it, how you could interact with it. And so you had to sort of make choices where you gave the illusion of this world, but you wouldn't really be able to sort of go and do anything you wanted to. But during that time, myself and the other people working on Wing Commander and other games would always sort of fantasize about like what the dream game would be, which would be like you could go anywhere, it would all be at the same level of detail, run around, interact with stuff, go to planets, fly ships, all seamlessly. That was really the big reason why I actually came back to doing games when I came back with Star Citizen, is that the technology had moved along enough that I felt like you could actually realize that vision. And that is what we've been working on. And it's a combination of both hardware becoming more powerful, but also the ability to connect to all the other users, the ability to use the cloud to sort of enhance your simulation abilities. And so there's a possibility to create worlds and universes and interact with the users in a way that you never used to be able to do 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And I think that's sort of the new paradigm that's coming to be in the game business, and it's incredibly exciting. So,
yeah, I mean, obviously, 93, the primary interactions where we had some dialogue trees that we could go through with the people that we created, and then lots of space flying. Obviously, Star Citizen has ambitions well beyond those kind of interfaces. I think the other thing that's happened also is that, in 93, the world, even at first-person shooters, was at its very most nascent state, and so there's been a whole collection of new design repertoire available to you that allow you to talk to audiences in different ways. What are the ones that have been kind of most exciting to you about the new stuff?
Well, for me, the ability to scale a simulation to a level that you couldn't do before. So in the past, if you were doing things, you would tend to fake them. You would create specific code to, I don't know.
You mean we couldn't get to those stars?
Yeah, you couldn't get to those stars. We would have a little cutscene, and then you would arrive on a very small patch of land. Or in the case of something like what we're doing with Star Citizen, I think this is probably true of a lot of the newer generation of games. You can simulate much more of the world, simulate at a much greater scale with a lot more objects or entities, as you'd like to call them, and make the game much more systemic. So the behavior becomes emergent and what the players do, and then it allows the players themselves to sort of almost create their own narrative and stories from their experiences. So you're, back in the early days of Origin, if any of you guys remember that, our motto used to be, "We create worlds." And that was very much sort of Richard Garriott's and my ethos of how we wanted to make games. And but in the old days, we sort of created the worlds by a lot of smoke and mirrors. In today's world, I think you need to do a lot. You don't have to do as much of that, and you can create much more of a sort of simulated environment, and that will allow players to sort of do what they want to do, and it feels a lot more empowering for them in terms of their visceral connection or emotional connection to the world. And I think that's sort of my dream, which is I want to live in this world in another place or time. In the case of Star Citizen, and so I've my whole career has been about trying to create experiences to get close to that. And I think in today's world, you're able to not only do this with the hardware, but you're also able to do it in a way that you can connect with all the people that are experiencing the game, or your community, in terms of seeing what they're doing, they're sharing what they're doing. Like, say, if they're broadcasting it on Twitch or YouTube, and it's a much more connected overall experience. And I think for me, it's sort of the new paradigm in games. It's I don't view games as this sort of single experience that you sell on a box that you install and play and you're done in a week or two. It's sort of you connect to an experience or a world or a universe, and you spend time in it, maybe years, and with your friends, and it's an ongoing sort of relationship. And it's quite different, but it's I think a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think what was interesting about those origin days was what the definition of the word "we" was at that period of time. It was occasionally even a royal we, you might say, in that particular case. It was a relatively limited number of people who got to do that. It was you and Richard and maybe Andy Hollis and Warren Spector on a good day, and then some of the people within your teams. And obviously, we're more technically limited in that context. What's changed now, obviously, is it's almost limitations of imagination. And do you think maybe the fact that our technical...
A budget to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, yeah, details. that our technical frontiers have pushed out so far, I always described it that we operate from a deficit of imagination as much as any other single thing. Do you think that the redefinition of the we make worlds, meaning going from being a few people to including the whole of the audience, you think that's actually... I had never thought of it, just literally before right now, but it seems like that was actually ultimately a solution to the imagination problem, the imagination.
Well, no, I definitely think so. So I think that, one of the things I find the most gratifying is, so even in the case of Star Citizen, where we're still early, the game isn't complete, we do share early builds, and, portions of the game are complete, and people are playing it, is, you get to see all the people playing create their own world or narrative or stories, and you see them sharing with other players, whether it's on the forums or they're sharing videos or they're discussing it. And I think in some ways it's much more of a shared experience than a storyteller. Say if you were going to go back and look at Ultima or Wing Commander or something, where you would construct the story for someone to take their journey through. Where in terms you create a sort of sandbox for them where they have the possibility, and
a big tree actually, and that was that area.
Well, yeah, and then you let people kind of experience it, and in some ways, and that is actually one of the goals of what we're going to try to do with Star Citizen, is that the experiences and actions of the players will also inform how the universe itself sort of unfolds, what the storylines happen, kind of what factions. Where the alliances shift and all that will be very much driven as much by the sort of player interactions as anything that we would do as sort of game masters beyond that. And that was actually one of the main goals of Star Citizen, was to create a sort of living, breathing universe that feels alive. It doesn't feel like it's a static. It doesn't feel like it's a theme park. And again, that's all possible because, with the advent of, online cloud computing and the technology, you can sort of combine all those, and you're able to sort of be flexible in a way that you couldn't have been, 5-10 years ago.
In the time that I built systemic products of all kinds, usually sports products, but also simulations, what was always interesting to me was how behavior would emerge out of that. That you build the game to do this, and people would end up getting completely involved in stuff you would never otherwise focus on. That was a big transition from the Wing Commanders, and even the Ultimas of the world, were really much about us preconceiving the experiences you're going to have, the sets, the locations, the protagonists, all those props. Star Citizen is a much more systemic game. The interactions in it are a byproduct of a bunch of systems talking to each other and then individuals pushing those systems around. Have you found there have been user behavior that you didn't anticipate that put a smile on your face in particular?
Yeah, no, there was. I mean, actually, there's a great example of this. So when we first debuted what we call sort of the baby persistent universe, which is ultimately the sort of foundation of where the full like online experience will come, where you travel between locations, planets, so we'd had the first version out, and it very constrained. You had I think three or four different space stations you could go visit and fly around. It does work at a sort of real world scale, so you do travel like millions of kilometers to go between these different space stations. But there was a place called Covalex, and it had a vending machine. Big Benny's was this sort of fake brand we had for it. And one of the players had figured out, because it was sort of physics-driven and systemic, that they could use their gun to shoot, because it was in zero-G, the Big Benny's vending machine, and they pushed it out of the space station. And then they brought their ship up to it, which was, I think was a Constellation, so it's a bigger ship, multi-crew, 2, 3, 4 people can play it, and then lowered the bay, and they pushed in the vending machine, and then they raised the bay, and then flew the ship 1 million kilometers back to the home base, and then landed, opened the bay, pushed the vending machine up and put it into sort of their starting room. And that was not anything that we'd thought of or designed. It just fell out of the system. So they'd taken this item.
Would that be the officially first recorded crime?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was definitely crime because it's an abandoned base, but it sort of became, a community rite of passage. So then people would do the Big Benny's challenge and see how quickly they could get the vending machine from, this space station 1 million kilometers away from this other space station, and they would, do it. And it was just kind of cool. But that sort of fell out of the fact that it's physics driven, and it was well before, we were planning to have the, proper like manipulation and interaction with items, and it was cool. And there are in quite a few cases where just you would have players, because we still don't have most of the game systems, but say they would have their ship damaged where they couldn't fly it out somewhere in an asteroid field, and then they would get on the chat and they would say, hey, can you come help me? And other players that had logged on would see that in the chat, and then they would, we don't even have, we're meant to have things like the beacons where you can see it on your radar, but that's not in the game yet. So people would figure out where they would search the asteroid fields, and then they'd pick them up and take them back to the space station, and they would tell their story on the forums, or they would make videos of it. And that's kind of the fun emergent behavior, I think, when you create a really sort of well realized sandbox that can come out of it. And that's actually what I'm most excited about long-term for Star Citizen, is as we get more and more of the world in there, more and more of the systems and the tools in there, just what's going to happen, because you can't predict it. And if you have a lot of people, there's just a lot of different options that can happen.
I'm amused by the whole vending machine thing. When I grew up in Las Vegas, there was a certain portion of the society that ran the vending machine business in Las Vegas, and those are not people you wanted to steal their machines. Yeah. It was pretty usually ugly.
Yeah, we don't have space mafia
yet. What is funny about this is also you've probably started to talk to really different audiences. So obviously we had our 1993 audiences, and then they all have children, and God forbid some of them have had their own children again. You're obviously selling product and have partners that were folks that were your friends before. Tell me about some of these new audiences and how have they found you? Obviously, they've had lots of different times to get kind of on your particular wagon.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I have to say again, if I was going to say the one thing that would be, a cornerstone of Star Citizen is the community. So even before I announced it as a crowdfunding, as a project that I was crowdfunding, we'd created a site that sort of gathered, people that love space sims together, and say people that like some of my past games. And so before we announced, we already had 30,000 people sign up for this site, and it was one of the reasons why we thought, well, we probably will do all right in crowdfunding, because there seems to be a decent number of people that would like to see this kind of game again, and like wing commanders and privateers and freelancers and stuff. But they've been essentially the foundation of the game.
Yeah, the cornerstone.
Driven from that perspective, and it's pretty interesting because it is fairly I mean, yes, we definitely have a fair number of older people that they were 12 or 14 and they played Wing Commander and it had an impression on them. But then there's also the same people again that played Freelancer at the same age, and they're not quite as old, but now they're, say, in their 20s or they're in their 30s. So we know there's a fairly big range, and over the time, I think it's accumulated people that like the Wing Commander 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So ultimately, I think that's one of the reasons why we have such great support is over the years, there's just been a lot of people that have liked some of these past games that I've done, or they like the genre a lot, and they like the idea of creating essentially this dream game that you can kind of go anywhere and do anything, but at the sort of resolution and detail and scale that we're going for. And so it's, I'm very thankful to them because I wouldn't be able to do it without them.
Well, I think people have been buying into that dream for at least 25 years, if not a lot longer.
Well, I've been dreaming it for at least that long. So, and I know a lot of our team is, and again, I think that's one of the reasons why it resonates is because I think that this is a time where you finally feel like the tools are there to make that, in quotation marks, dream game. And then you're sort of limited by your imagination, your time, and your funds. And luckily, we've done all right on the funds, and the time's been there because the community's been very patient in allowing us to really sort of go for it and build it at a scale that I probably would not be able to do at any other, like I'm pretty confident if I was doing this inside the confines of a traditional publisher model, the budget would just be too big, the risk would be too long.
Or even linear.
Yeah, or even, well, yeah, I mean, essentially, at the moment, I will be up there with the biggest event movies in budget by the time it's finished.
Right. So a lot of the theme of this is about science fiction. There are things that science fiction did a good job, I think, of anticipating. We were joking about some of those. I'm a big fan of Ray Bradbury's The Veldt is what I call the first video game story. But one of the things that I never read a story that I think properly anticipated was the effect that we have had on our audience and what they expect out of other things. So you and I were talking about at lunch how even linear storytelling has gone long form. The most successful linear storytelling forms now are at least 13 hours long, and in many cases multiple years long. The concept of building a game now that is 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 200 hours of gameplay, that was exotic beyond belief several years ago, and now that's a normalized customer expectation. What are some of those other expectations that you see arriving, and what are the borders we're going to have to break through to make those work?
Well, I think the biggest one is that sort of people expect a level of fidelity or detail and stuff. I mean, I was saying previously that, there's another sci-fi game that came out that got some criticism for its quality of animation, but if I actually look at the quality of animation, it was pretty damn good for not that long ago.
You can say who it is, that's okay.
But no, I mean, it's a great looking game, and the engine looks great, but everyone's expectation now just keeps on ratcheting up. So, whoever's, done the state of the art, that's what everyone expects for, and if you don't have that, then it sort of hurts people's sort of, I guess, affinity to the world that you're trying to portray. And so
they constantly see the deficit between their imagination.
Yeah, I think that the technical prowess is now getting to the point where we can, in games, and this is what's really interesting to me, deliver an experience that has like the texture and the detail that you would see, say, in a film or a TV show. And I think that's one of the reasons why people emotionally, besides the story and the character and associating with them, that makes sense. The world looks real to you when you're watching a film. You see it, you don't doubt that that is a location you're seeing. And in the past, with games, that's been a barrier because, like if you go back to the 80s, it's been big blocky pixels. And, now it's getting to the point where that's not a barrier anymore. And then it's really about how do you emotionally
Now it's
connect.
the style. Now it's called.
Well, yeah, that's the style. but now it's about how you emotionally connect to the world or the story or the characters or the experience you're going to go through. And so I think some of the...
And how that evolves.
Yeah, and so for me, I feel like the technology is now at the point that games have always had or interactive entertainment has always had the potential to be more affecting than linear entertainment because ultimately it's you doing, you have the agency. It's your choice. If you make the mistake and your best friend dies, it's on you. It's not on the character you're watching in a show. It's just making those choices feel real, feel legitimate. And so the more that it's open, it's more open form, it's more sort of systemic, it's more simulation, the more that sort of looks real and looks visceral, the more I think that the medium becomes more compelling, and so therefore more emotionally engaging, and really has a chance to elevate to another level. And that's sort of where I feel like we're on the cusp, and I think that's kind of where we're going. So besides the ability to sort of create these worlds at scale and tell these incredible experiences, it's now a matter of like, how do you make those sort of emotionally resonant? How do you want to be in this world? How do you want to take this journey? And so in some ways, I think some of the technical challenges are now going to be less, and it's going to be more creative challenges and how you deal with it. And so that's, again, pretty interesting to me, because I don't feel the same limitations I did when I was doing Wing Commander or a freelancer and I got kind of frustrated with the technology. Now I sort of feel like you can do it with the technology. It's the other aspects you've got to address.
I'm over, but I'm going to ask one question I'll give this to him so he can throw it at me. This does sound like, so it sounds like the nature of this project is it could be the last game you ever work on, because it could never end. And I don't mean that in a bad way, meaning that your technology can evolve. You can change the entire rendering system out 3 years from now and improve the product, and
yes.
People will continue their existing journey versus
having to start one of the things that I find very attractive about it is I don't feel the pressure to have this one release be absolutely perfect. I feel like it's an ongoing relationship with the people, the community, the people that have sort of paid or backed the game.
And the technology that you operate in.
And as things get better, we can improve it. We can improve the stories, add more content, and it's an ongoing process. So it's sort of, whatever. It'd be like having a long-running television show that you're constantly improving and curating. And so from a creative...
Be careful. Those 25 years franchises will wear you out.
Well, that may be true. I'm at the beginning there.
I want to thank everybody for coming. I also want to thank Dean for having us. I actually don't spend a lot of my time lauding praise on the press, but Dean's been one of the consistent good guys in the business and has always been interested in the best outcome for the whole of the gaming business. And I think that puts him in a unique position, so I want to thank him for having us.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.